He is the senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, former counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights at the Justice Department, Bush administration, and he is the Director of Election Reform at Heritage Action. Hans, wanted to get you on because, like you, I watched the Super Bowl, but thought the best part of it was Bill O'Reilly interviewing our president. Now, I don't know. That was kind of a leap, but unless you're just this huge Seattle fan. What'd you think, Hans?
Well, it was the game or the interview?
What'd you think was better, the game or the interview?
The game was better than the interview, and that's not saying very much given what a disaster it was for Denver.
Wow. All right. Well, Hans, I got to tell you, I thought he did a pretty good job, but then again, but the follow-ups, he has a very different style. He goes to that detractor mode. That said, here is the president being asked about the IRS scandal and corruption. 157 times, Douglas Schumann went to the White House. Roll it.
Did you speak to him a lot yourself?
I do not recall meeting with him in any of these meetings that are pretty routine meetings.
Okay, so you don't recall seeing Schulman, because what some people are saying is that the IRS was used at a local level in Cincinnati, maybe other places, to go after.
Absolutely wrong.
But how do you know that? Because we still don't know what happened there.
Bill, we do. That's not what happened. Folks have, again, had multiple hearings on this. I mean, these kinds of things keep on surfacing, in part because you and your TV station will promote them.
But
when
don't
folks
you feel
actually,
there are unanswered questions?
Bill, when you actually look at the stuff, there have been multiple hearings on it. What happened here was that you've got a 501c4 law that people think is confusing. No, that the folks did not know how to implement. Okay. Because it basically says,
so you're saying
if you're involved,
no corruption there at all? No.
That's not what I'm saying. That's actually...
No, but I want to know what you're saying. You're the leader of the country. You're saying no corruption?
No.
None?
No. There were some boneheaded decisions out of a
but
local
no mass
office.
corruption?
Not even mass corruption. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Okay.
All right, Hans, just on the facts and the record, because people could say critics, people could say detractors. The people in the Cincinnati office weren't rogue. They were first called rogue, if I'm not mistaken. Their testimony absolutely contradicts that, and the evidence does as well. That said, what if you were asking a follow-up to that question, what would it include?
Well, I would be asking him about the fact that there were no problems like this prior to 3 years ago, when things suddenly changed at the IRS and they started holding up the applications of only conservative organizations. If what the president is saying is true, is just a confusing law, well, then that would have happened to organizations of whatever political stripe. But in fact, that's not what happened. I would have asked him, well, if things were so confused, why was it that your half-brother was his organization was granted a tax exemption within a month of application, and it was made retroactive?
Tell me, Hans, does Bill O'Reilly have access to this information?
Yeah, but it's tough to. I think it's tough to ask a lot of questions when you have limited time.
Absolutely, I said that last hour. I understand and appreciate, and again, great deal of respect for him. But don't we need? Everybody calls in to this program, even if they disagree with me. They want accountability. I know you know more about the law and the violations, the transgressions of this administration in particular, than anybody else. And I can only imagine how frustrated you are. But we're looking for accountability. And it seems to me the president can just say, it's all, we've had hearings. The investigation's not over. So how does he know that there's no corruption there? I mean, there's so many different areas here. I'm sitting there going, as an American, what are you, what, I can just say, it reminds me of this skit with President Bush, HW, walking into a campaign 92. This is a real reach, but you'll like it if you remember it. And if you don't, I've really gone. But the point is this. He keeps responding with 1,000 points of light, Iraq War, 100-day invasion, we did it, rather than answering the questions that the people had for him at this diner about the fact that they couldn't get jobs, okay? Granted, it's slanted as hell. My point is, it was almost as if there was a parody going on because he kept on repeating the same thing. We've had investigations, absolutely not. Smidgen. He even got confident with, not even a smidgen of corruption. Was there a smidgen of corruption, Hans von Spakovsky?
Oh, I think there definitely was. But let me tell you a point that I really haven't heard anybody make at all, and that is that, don't forget, he is the chief law enforcement official of the United States. And we know that there is an ongoing investigation by the FBI under the lead of the Justice Department. What he should have said is, look, I can't answer any questions about this because there's a current criminal investigation going on. He now basically has said to the investigators, well, we've already come to a conclusion, that is the administration, that there was nothing here, so we're basically indirectly telling you, here's how your investigation should come out.
Tell me, Hans, you've worked in the Department of Justice. If the president, as you said, the chief law enforcement officer of the land, makes these kinds of statements, do the ears of the Justice Department and those involved in those investigations perk up?
Oh, of course they do. And certainly in this case where we know that they picked a lawyer in the Civil Rights Division to head the investigation who is a huge donor to the Obama campaign, raising a clear conflict of interest, which Eric Holder has just simply dismissed as not worthy of even looking into.
You wrote about this on January 10th of last month. The DOJ has an Obama donor running the investigation, won't do anything about it, titled Real and Perceived Bias in the IRS Investigation. Fantastic. Once again, just highlighting the fact that you're way ahead of these things, you're always on them, and you're explaining it to the rest of us. But in there, you talk about the fact that if there is a bias perceived, real or otherwise, there is a procedure and a review, and what we have, as you just mentioned, is Eric Holder saying, I don't see anything there.
No, that's right.
Last week.
He was specifically asked about this last week in an oversight hearing, and he got mad. He got mad at the question and the fact that the issue was even being raised.
So what is the recourse? I ask you this every week, and I would apologize, but I think we all want to know, because we're sitting there and we're like, wait a second, this man is changing law, immigration law. You know the list. You've written about the list. What can we do, Hans?
Well, some of it is a lot of it is up to Congress. Congress should keep doing more investigations of this and try to ferret out more people from the inside who are willing to talk about this. But the other thing to do is to try to fix this through legislation, because right now, actually, the IRS is proposing some new regs that are just terrible and will clearly are intended to restrict the ability of conservative Tea Party organizations and others to engage in political activity. That ought to be stopped through legislation.
And they're conflating some areas here regarding the primary focus of an organization versus the political focus that may be, and I really don't understand how it seems subjective unless they have an objective line of criteria that would be met, and you'd have to check a box like 80-20, but then is it messages, and it has to do with election guides and the idea of informing Americans and making society better. So, Hans, what should counter these regulations in order to address the confusion as it's been stated?
Congress could pass a law that actually takes this out of the hands of the IRS and lays out a very clear, easily understood line and definition for what can and can't be done by nonprofit organizations, and one that does not violate their First Amendment rights to engage in political speech.
Hans, on a mass scale with a targeting 80% plus of targeting of groups, again, not a smidgen of corruption. Lois Lerner, she was the director of this, and now where is she?
She's retired, collecting a fat government pension, and absolutely nothing else has happened to her.
And that was her division.
Yeah.
And what about Douglas Shulman? Can somebody go to the White House 157 times and not mention these when we have a timeline that lines up with a change in rules? Certainly that would invite more questions.
Well, it would, because if you look at the head of the IRS during the Bush administration, in the entire 8 years, I think he went to the White House once or twice.
And the investigation officially is not over, but we haven't had people interviewed from those groups. These groups were asked about the prayers that they would say, the content of their prayers at these meetings.
Yeah, and this hasn't stopped. Look, news hit just last week that the IRS is now giving a hard time to an organization out in Hollywood called Friends of Abe, which is an organization made up of actually, conservatives and Republicans in Hollywood who have to hide their identity. And the IRS was asking them to identify who their members are, which is completely irrelevant to tax exemption status and under the IRS. So they are still giving a hard time to conservative organizations. That has not changed.
If you mess with the rule of law as we've seen, be it with bondholders, Chrysler, I mean, we can go down the list. Immigration reform and not enforcing the law. The NLRB decision that will come down, I guess in June they release that decision, Hans?
It is going to be any time between now and June, yeah.
Okay. Did the founders envision this type of corruption? And our government, I mean, inevitably they would say, hey, look, you have one last gasp. I mean, we put the funding with the people, the People's House, direct election by the people. Originally the Senate wasn't, led by state legislators. So they understood the directness, the power of the purse they put in the people's hands, and that is in the House, is it not?
It is. Look, I think the founders, they saw this kind of corruption in the English government. They designed, they hoped, a constitution with a structure that would avoid that. But quite frankly, the power of our government here today is infinitely more and worse than the English monarchy that they fought against.
And the umbrella which we cannot escape, and they understood that of the federal government. That's why even if they had bad laws, they wanted the states to be able to work that out, because inevitably it would allow us to be human and fallen, but not overstep the power and allow for people to move and to use the power of the bully pulpit or their particular bully pulpits, if it's the governor or it's the people getting into the arena and discussing these things. Tell me something, Hans, when it comes to legislation, what's the order? Do you convince people after you pass it, or are you supposed to convince people first and have it go up the chain? What did our founders think?
I think you convince the people first, because that strengthens the spine of your elected representatives so that they then will push legislation through.
Absolutely. Exceptions to every rule in regard to the way things have gone in our history, but nonetheless, there is a design, a man who can explain it to us all, and we are grateful because he does it so well. Hans von Spakovsky, Senior Legal Analyst at the Heritage Foundation, Director of Election Reform at Heritage Action, and he's also the author of Who's Counting. Hans, thanks, man. Great to be with you.
Thank you, Crane. Bye-bye.
Take care, bro. All right, now,